Welcome to the International Copper Association podcast program series, Transforming the Future with Copper, a Metamorphosis. I'm Nicole Witoslawski, Manager of Global Communications for the ICA. In this podcast, we will discuss the growth of renewable energy. You will hear from two international experts who are working on research, education, and policies to advance renewable energy globally. First, Steve Kokoda, Vice President of the ICA, joins me to talk about renewable energy and the role copper plays in the advancement of renewable energy resources around the world. Steve?
Thanks, Nicole. The use of copper helps to reduce CO2 emissions and lowers the amount of energy needed to produce electricity. Renewable energy systems require the use of more copper than traditional systems to ensure efficiency. Examples include sunlight, wind, ocean hydropower, biomass, geothermal resources, biofuels, and hydrogen derived from renewable resources. Renewable energy resources exist over wide geographical areas, and markets are projected to have rapid and strong growth around the world. Renewable energy systems need to be as productive as possible, and this requires using the most efficient conductors. Copper is the best non-precious conductor of heat and electricity, and it plays a critical role in ensuring renewable energy systems operate at peak efficiency. The use of copper helps to reduce CO2 emissions and lowers the amount of energy needed to produce electricity. Renewable energy systems require the use of more copper than traditional systems to ensure efficiency.
Today, renewable energy sources provide almost 1/4 of the world's power. As Steve said, copper plays an important role in making this energy as efficient as possible. Our program guests are Ron Benioff, Manager of Global Programs for the National Renewable Energy Lab, operated by the U.S. Department of Energy in Golden, Colorado. Ron is presently working in the U.S. During the recording of this program, Ron joined us from Paris, where he was working on a number of program initiatives for the National Renewable Energy Lab. Jose Briano joins us from Carrera, a global consulting firm headquartered in Madrid, Spain. Carrera's focus is on renewable energy and energy-efficient markets. The firm's main geographical support area is in Europe, but they are also active in other major growth areas around the world. We'll first hear from Jose Briano, who spoke with us about renewable energy and energy storage planning in Europe and Asia. Jose talks about investments that support renewable expansion with comments and examples of U.S. renewable policy initiatives provided by Ron Benioff with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Jose, you recently conducted a study with the objective of building a vision on possible pathways to 100% renewable energy power share in Europe. Can you explain about what is meant by 100% renewable energy share in Europe?
What is meant by 100% renewable share is simply that 100% of the electricity that is generated in Europe comes from renewable energy sources. Now, in our study, we've taken that a step further, and we've also included the electrification of some sectors which currently are not electricity-based. A clear example is electric vehicles, so transport. We've also included that in the study.
Ron, while in Paris, you were working on a global level. Did you see differences in various regions around the world moving faster or perhaps slower than you've experienced in the United States with the NREL?
Yes, there are differences in the types of markets that are advancing around the world, but we are seeing a dramatic growth. There's been a huge increase in renewable energy penetration and investment in the U.S. as well as other countries. So, for example, comparing Europe to the U.S., in Europe they've used much more extensive tariffs or guaranteed payments for renewable generation, whereas in the U.S., a prime driver for most states are portfolio standards or mandates that utilities generate a certain amount of their electricity from renewable energy. And there's some pros and cons of those two policy mechanisms. The feed-in tariffs provide a nice guarantee of investment, but are also highly subject to availability of government funding and can be a drain on resources.
So, Jose, Ron Benioff, talked a little bit about the need to deploy renewable energy and renewable energy efficiency techniques. And he talked about different policies in place in Europe as opposed to the US, and the idea of Europe using tariffs to generate some income for their renewable energy systems. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. What Europe decided to do was to, let's say, create artificial prices, artificial revenues, if you wish, for renewable energy. What I mean by this, Europe was actually paying more for the kilowatt hour produced by any number of renewable energies than was justified by the market. So, for example, PV, say, just to give you a simple numeric example, instead of, if the market price, the average market price for a kilowatt hour produced in the market, say from fossil fuels or hydro, etc., is at 50, well, Europe was paying for PV 100. This difference of 50 was necessary in order to cover the high costs of, for example, PV at an early stage in its development. Now costs have come down a lot, so this support from the tariff is not as necessary. However, the crisis has put European governments a bit against the wall in terms of maintaining these tariffs, since it has resulted in decreases in demand of energy, and also a decrease in the revenues the government has to share and support these renewable energies.
Jose, in your opinion, as a clean energy expert, what do you see happening in developing countries such as China, Mexico, and India? They're expanding their infrastructure, they're just building their grids. How does what's happening there compare to regions such as Europe and the United States, which have already had their infrastructure built?
Sure, Nicole. I think it would be fair to say that there are reasons why it's not utterly fair to compare these developed markets, and I'll explain what I mean. If we take the example of Europe, its development of renewable energy was not really driven by the short-term need for energy. Europe, in fact, has excess energy, especially now following the crisis. There was a contraction in the amount of energy demanded, although now it's expanding again. It was more a case of substitution. And that's to do with its, let's say, environmental policy, but it was also related with its industrial policy. Europe wanted to lead in renewable energies, and that's why it invested by supporting renewable energies with tariffs, which has artificially high prices. The reason that they did this is because it was hoping that it would allow European players to develop, and that then European players would, let's say, go to other markets and dominate, let's say, the renewable energy industry. This has not worked out quite as they expected because of the way the costs have developed, and also because of competition from other countries, for example, China in PV, that was not expected. So on the other hand, you have countries like China, Mexico, Brazil, India. These countries are facing demand expansion. They've got severe challenges in terms of developing sufficient supply of energy. Now, China is not at ground zero. They've now developed quite a bit of infrastructure. India, Mexico are a bit further behind. Brazil is sort of intermediate. For them, the choice is different, not only for the reason that they're not substituting, which means it's an investment that already makes more sense, but also because costs are so much lower thanks to the fact that Europe mainly has installed so much wind and so much PV.
Ron Benioff also spoke with us about the dramatic growth of renewable energy around the world. He cites differences in how countries are investing in renewable energy.
I think we're seeing a huge difference in many developing countries that, well, in some of the bigger economies, they're able to invest in new infrastructure. In China, India, Mexico, and other places, they're building a lot of new generation and is driving renewable energy investment and has become one of the primary markets for renewable energy investment. Whereas In the U.S., there is obviously new generation coming in, but it's often in places that are far from load, so we have to invest significantly in building out transmission capacity at the same time. And then for other developing countries, they're really looking at renewable energy not only for grid generation, but very heavily for distributed generation and providing renewable power and as a replacement for very costly diesel.
Ron,
do you think, because based on the fact that many of these developing countries don't, like you mentioned, they don't already have the infrastructure, are they embracing renewables quicker than established power infrastructures like we have in Europe or the United States?
I think in Europe and in many states in the U.S., there's very strong public support for renewable energy as a cost-competitive, clean, domestic source of energy. I think it's true that in some other countries, China would be a good example, the rate of investment in renewable energy is higher than it is in the U.S. just because there's so much demand. The demand is much higher for new generation, so that's definitely the case. But I think the level of public support is about the same, or in many cases stronger in the U.S. There are some countries in the world where the level of support maybe surpasses what would be typical in most states in the U.S. So Denmark, for example, has a very strong commitment to renewable energy development, is one of the leaders in the world in terms of the amount of generation from renewable energy. Germany as well, there's high levels of support.
would you tell me about the Clean Energy Ministerial and your work in Paris over the last 2 years?
So the Clean Energy Ministerial has a number of initiatives organized into 4 themes. There's one theme on energy efficiency, which includes a collaborative initiative across the major economies of the world. And so these are initiatives on appliance efficiency and building and industry efficiency. There's a set of 4 initiatives on clean energy supply, on bioenergy, carbon capture, hydropower, and solar and wind, working on sharing knowledge and best practices on development and testing and analysis of these clean energy technologies. There's 4 initiatives on integration issues, the 21st Century Power Partnership, which looks at integration of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and grid controls, and is providing training and technical assistance to grid operators and regulators to help promote high level of renewable penetration together with efficiency and grid management solutions. And NREL is the operating agent of that initiative. There's also initiatives on electric vehicles, on smart grid, and on sustainable cities. And then there's 3 initiatives about sort of building broad policies and capacity. One is the Clean Energy Solution Center, for which NREL also is the operating agent. And we maintain a clearinghouse of best practice reports on policy best practices, on data and analysis tools that can support policy development. We provide expert assistance to countries on policy design and implementation and have responded to over 120 requests to date from governments and technical institutes to advise them on policy design. And we provide training and technical assistance, and we've been very pleased in that initiative to partner closely with the International Copper Association and with Leonardo Energy on the delivery of that support.
Can you talk about the work or the partnership you have had with the International Copper Association and Leonardo Energy, specifically what project you may have worked with them on?
The International Copper Association is a sponsor of the Solution Center. They've provided support. We've worked specifically with the Copper Association and with Leonardo Energy on several projects. One has been to enhance e-learning materials and resources. Leonardo Energy has a very rich library of e-learning resources. We've worked together to add in additional policy-oriented e-learning resources. We've probably worked the deepest, though, on creating a Clean Energy Regulators Initiative, which is very closely linked to this 21st Century Power Partnership, where we're sharing common policy resources across the community of regulators around the world and linking existing regulator networks, offering some e-learning and training materials, offering expert assistance through the Solution Center to those regulators. And I should note, too, that the Leonardo Energy is a very experienced organization in the knowledge management area, has also been very active in providing advice on the design of the Solution Center, and we're jointly conducting outreach. We highlight resources available through Leonardo Energy, and they in turn highlight the resources and services from the Solution Center.
What type of other organizations are you developing partnerships with around the globe?
So the Power Partnership works with regulators, with grid operators, with utilities around the world to support integrated clean energy solutions. And we also do some in-depth country-level technical support, especially currently in India and Mexico and South Africa, where we're providing training on integrated solutions. We're working on advisory support on grid management, solutions on codes and standards, on assisting with modeling and scenarios for high renewable penetration. And this complements the broader work on reports and training and peer exchange across all the major economies.
This ends part one of our Renewables podcast segment with Ron Benioff from the National Renewable Energy Lab and Jose Briano from Carrera, a global energy consulting firm in Spain. Please click forward to hear part two of the ICA's program on renewable energy.